Seeing the digits 3777 were enough to strike fear in the hearts of wrongdoers and outlaws in Montana. These were the secret and mysterious numbers that would often be written on doors or left on a note, where the would-be recipients would find them, and it served as a final warning to leave town or face the consequences for their actions. The exact meaning of the numbers has been lost to history, but a few theories abound about their origins. One is that the numbers represent the dimensions of a grave, 3 feet wide, 7 feet deep, and 77 inches, 6 feet 5 inches long. Another theory is that the numbers represent individuals from a vigilante group that had its origins in the mining camps of California. Another theory is the numbers represent certain persons of the Masonic order who were the pioneers of the Vigilantes. The Vigilantes who left these messages for undesirables in Montana were an essential part of life, as they were sometimes the only deterrent to wholesale mayhem and bloodshed. But sometimes the Vigilantes went too far, as was the case with Jack Slade. Jack had been a wagon master, a stagecoach driver, and been put in charge of running a mail line that ran from St. Joseph, Missouri, to Salt Lake City. During an adventurous life on the road, he once killed an employee for hindering the progress of a freight train. Another time, while unarmed, he was shot 3 times in his side by a disgruntled associate with a revolver. Slade, when shot, staggered, but did not fall. His assassin then fired both barrels of a shotgun into him before he fell down in a heap. His would-be killer told bystanders to bury the body before he rode off. As they went to move the bloody torn body, it whispered, "Don't bury me yet." He eventually recovered and delivered retribution to his assailant. Now he had arrived in Virginia City with his wife, also named Virginia. She was a devoted wife and would stand by her husband regardless of any of his indiscretions. She wore a revolver under her skirt and, by all accounts, was a good shot. The Slades would often race their thoroughbreds through the streets of Virginia City, as Virginia was as high-spirited as Jack and an excellent horsewoman. Jack set about making a nuisance of himself in town whenever he had a drink, which was quite often. He wasn't a bad man, but after a session in the saloon, he would turn into a hellraiser, riding around town, shooting into the air, and generally causing mischief. 11-year-old Molly Sheehan gives account of one of Jack's episodes.
I was alarmed by a clatter past me of horses' hooves and the crack of pistol shots. A man galloping his horse recklessly down the street and was firing a 6-shooter in the air and whooping wildly. Suddenly he reared his horse back on its haunches, turned it sharply, and forced it through the swinging door of a saloon. I sidled into the first open doorway that I dared enter. "That's Slade," said the storekeeper, "on one of his sprees, shooting up the town, scaring women and children. That smart aleck ought to be strung up." He led me out the back door and warned me to run home quickly and stay out of range of stray bullets. "He'll get his needins yit," he threatened.
Another friend of Jack said of him, "Slade was unquestionably a most useful man in his time to the stage line and to the cause of progress in the far west, and he never was a robber, as some have represented. But after years of contention with desperate men, he became so reckless and regardless of human life that his best friends must concede that he was at times a most dangerous character, and no doubt by his defiance of the authority and wholesome discipline of the Vigilantes, brought upon himself the calamity which he suffered. Jack had not committed a major crime in Virginia City, but the decent citizens of the town had had enough of his wild ways, and Slade was set to hang. Knowing that Virginia could be quite persuasive, the Vigilantes knew they needed to act quickly. A friend had left to warn Virginia of the impending hanging, but it was too late. Just as someone in the crowd shouted, "Mrs. Slade is coming," the box under Jack's feet was kicked away. Silence filled the air. After a while, the sound of hoofbeats could be heard, and Virginia arrived to defend her husband. But it was too late. The new widow cursed those assembled, and the town, she employed a carpenter to build a tin-lined coffin and had it filled with a keg of whiskey. She swore her husband would never be buried in this damned territory and shipped the remains to Salt Lake. Jack was the 23rd of over 50 hangings carried out by the Vigilantes. Later, through various authors and members of the Vigilantes who hanged him, Jack was painted as a murdering villain, but it was far from the truth. As the boss of a male line, Jack had been tough, sometimes ruthless in his duties, and some say he was a bully, but he was a man of his times, and the wholesale killings of 20 men was a likely figment of the imagination of a vigilante who sought to justify his killing. Most historians agree that the other men hanged by the Vigilantes were probably guilty of the various crimes they were accused of, and the executions brought a degree of safety and peace to the area. Today, every Montana highway patrolman wears the 3777 number on his patch as a show of respect to the forefathers of law enforcement. Henry Starr was an outlaw with movie star looks. Henry was part Cherokee, his mother came from a respected family, but his father's family was riddled with outlaws, one of whom was married to the bandit queen Belle Starr. When a youth in Indian Territory, Henry had been driving a wagon into the town of Nowata. 2 deputy marshals stopped Henry and searched the wagon. During the search, the lawmen found a quantity of whiskey and arrested the young man for introducing spirits into Indian Territory. In court, Henry pleaded he had no knowledge of the whiskey, but he was convicted and fined anyway. Henry's first brush with the law left him angry at the way he was treated. A couple of months later, he was accused of horse stealing and again arrested and remained in custody at Fort Smith. A family member posted his bail and young Henry went on the run. He met up with 2 friends. The trio then went on crime spree, robbing various stores in the territory, and in July of 1892, they robbed the Nowata Railroad Depot of $1,700. Deputy U.S. Marshals were hot on the heels of the small gang, and on December 12th, after a tip-off, Marshals Floyd Wilson and Henry Dickey rode into the XU Ranch, located just a few miles out of Nowata. The deputies asked the rancher if he had seen Starr and the others. He answered that he hadn't. The marshals, confident the tip was correct, spent the rest of the day riding over the ranch looking for the gang. The following day, the lawmen returned to the ranch and were invited to take theater dinner at the bunkhouse by the rancher, Arthur Dodge. As the marshals were finishing their meal, Dodge rode up and stated he had just seen Henry Starr riding by, pointing out the direction Starr had taken. The marshals ran to the corral for their horses. Floyd Wilson's horse was already saddled, and he jumped on and was off in pursuit of Starr. Marshal Dickey had to saddle his horse, and he left moments later. Marshal Wilson caught up with Henry Starr on the banks of Wolf Creek, riding up behind the outlaw. He shouted, "Hold up! I have a warrant for you, Henry Starr." Starr stopped his horse, turned around, and told the lawman, "You hold up." Starr slipped off his horse and faced the lawman. Wilson jumped from his horse and announced that he was a U.S. Marshal and fired a warning shot over Starr's head. He thought this would scare Starr into surrendering. It didn't. Starr quickly raised his Winchester and fired 4 shots that hit Wilson and knocked him to the ground. The marshal had been hit in both hips, his left thigh, and once in his calf. The marshal, although badly wounded, raised himself up to a sitting position, fumbled for his revolver in his holster, pulled it out, and fired in the direction of Starr, but all the shots missed. Starr walked up to Wilson, who was now out of bullets, and put the end of his barrel against the lawman's chest and shot him dead. Just at that moment, Marshal Dickey rode up, realized what had happened, jumped off his horse, and hit the dirt. Starr reached down and picked up the dead marshal's rifle and tried to fire on the prostrate Dickey. The rifle wouldn't function as its lever had been damaged from a bullet. Starr dropped the gun and turned to run back to his horse. Dickey fired but missed, scaring off his own horse with the gunfire. Starr caught Wilson's horse as it was closer and rode off into the distance. Henry Starr, now wanted for murder of a U.S. Marshal, met up with another outlaw named Frank Chesney. The duo then proceeded to rob stores and railroads throughout Indian Territory. In June of 1893, Starr and his growing gang of outlaws rode into Bentonville, Arkansas. They were on their way to hold up the People's Bank there. Starr's reputation and image were known far and wide, and it wasn't long before the good-looking outlaw was recognized and news of the arrival of the gang spread quickly. Starr and 3 other bandits entered the bank just as they were closing for the day. As they did so, gunfire erupted from outside. People started shooting at a gang member holding the horses. The 4 outlaws in the bank burst out the doors with guns blazing in every direction. Mounting the horses, they rode out of town, followed by a shower of lead. As they made their escape, a posse was hastily formed and took up the chase. The bandits anticipated this, and they fanned out in 5 different directions. The posse never found them, and Starr and the gang eventually met up later in a prearranged location. The close call had put the wind up the gang, and they decided to go their separate ways. A few months later, Henry Starr, his wife, and a fellow gang member named Kid Wilson were trying to lay low in Emporia, Kansas. They were staying at the Spalding House Hotel using their ill-gotten gains. While there, Kid Wilson decided to go to Colorado City to see friends. While out shopping, Henry and his wife were recognized. The next day, while eating in a restaurant, they were apprehended by police. Mrs. Starr, under intense questioning, revealed that Kid Wilson was in Colorado City. Police were alerted there and he was quietly taken into custody. Henry Starr was charged with the murder of U.S. Marshal Floyd Wilson and a dozen robberies. Found guilty and sentenced to hang, his lawyers appealed and a retrial was ordered. His second trial ended in the same verdict, and he appealed again. In a third trial, he pleaded guilty to manslaughter and received a 15-year sentence. While in jail, he met an acquaintance named Cherokee Bill. One day, Cherokee Bill was smuggled a gun. As he tried to escape, he shot a prison guard and was then cornered in the jail. Henry asked if he could talk Cherokee Bill into putting down his gun, and if he did, he asked that Cherokee Bill be unharmed. The authorities accepted, and after taking to Starr, Cherokee Bill put down his gun, and he was seized. Cherokee Bill was hanged for murder, and Starr resumed prison life. In 1903, Theodore Roosevelt pardoned the outlaw after hearing of his deed with Cherokee Bill. For 5 years, Starr kept out of trouble. Then he went back to his bank-robbing ways. He reformed his gang, and they robbed the bank in Tyro, Kansas in 1908. In 1909, he was snitched on and arrested again. Sentenced to 25 years jail, he was paroled in 4. He starred in a movie about one of his heists, and it was a huge hit. He then starred in another 3. Being a celebrity wasn't the life Henry wanted, and he returned to what he knew best: robbing banks. In 1921, he and his new gang entered the bank in Harrison, Arkansas. A shootout erupted, and Henry was shot in the back. The rest of the gang got away. Henry was taken to a doctor where the slug was removed. He said to those assembled around him, "I've robbed more banks than any man in America." And he was right. During the night, he took a turn for the worse, and the next morning, he died. His life of crime spanned 32 years, and he was responsible for the holdup of 21 banks and countless stores and railroads, netting the outlaw around $60,000.